Sea Week event, which puts a spotlight on marine pests and how to identify some of the invasive species that we encounter in New Zealand. I'm Sarah Coolins. I work for the Sir Peter Blake Marine Education and Recreation Centre in Long Bay in Auckland, where I also lead the national coordination of Sea Week. And with me tonight to share some of her knowledge, I have Aless Smith, a marine biosecurity specialist at Northland Regional Council. Before I hand it over to Aless, I just want to share a little bit about what's inspired this event. If you aren't too familiar with Sea Week, I'll just give you a little bit of insight into what it's all about. New Zealand, and this is New Zealand's annual national week celebrating the sea. Our Pinnacle Week is happening now, and it goes until March 12th. So there's still heaps more events which are coming up this weekend and the rest of this week. So be sure to check out the website to see if there's any near you. Sea Week's mission is centered around exciting and inspiring all New Zealanders to renew their connections with the sea and highlight the many ways our lives are intertwined with the health of our ocean environment. We want to create opportunities and connect people from all over New Zealand with ways to engage and learn about our impact on the environment and the actions that we can take to safeguard the ocean. So while we allow for a little bit more time for other people to join, we invite you to introduce yourselves to us in the chat. We would all love to know where you're tuning in from, and you're welcome to put your answers in the chat box. It's accessed via the little text bubble icon at the bottom of your screen, which should bring up the chat panel on the right-hand side. And we'll just we'll keep a lookout for that. If you have questions, you can either pop them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A function, which you should see in the bar on the bottom of your screen. I'm going to introduce our speaker. Our guest speaker tonight is Aless, and Aless is a part of the Marine Biosecurity team at Northland Regional Council. She has the responsibility to help look after our environment by ensuring boats are free of marine pests before they move around or into the waters of Northland. Her day-to-day work consists of conducting surveys on the undersides of boats, and it could include working with communities on responses to localized biosecurity incursions. Before working for NRC, Aless has studied at the University of Otago, where she did her master's degree, and she worked as a marine educator at the New Zealand Marine Study Centre. And that's actually when Aless and I first connected. So personally, as a scientific diver and rock pool explorer, I've been privileged to see lots of cool marine life. And to be honest, it's not always that obvious which species are not actually supposed to be there. Some creatures, which might look a little bit foreign, may have extended their range or just increased in numbers recently. So it's really important for us to keep collecting information and recording observations about what species are found where. But we do need to learn how to identify these species and figure out which ones are the invaders. So I'm going to invite Aless to share her screen, and we'll just get started. And the floor is yours now, Aless. Thank you.
Awesome. Kia ora koutou, ahi ahi po mare. Good evening. I'm just going to try share my screen, and I'll probably mute myself in the process again. Not quite sure why it's happening. So. Cool, hopefully that's all good. You can hear me? Great. So thank you very much for coming along. As Sarah said, my name is Aless, and I work as the Marine Biosecurity Specialist at the Northland Regional Council. We thought it'd be a really great idea to do a bit of a marine pest ID workshop, because as Sarah was saying, it's really important to know what you need to look out for while you're exploring, either in rock pools or just out and about in the ocean or on the ocean, whether you've just hauled out your boat and you're giving it a bit of a clean. Sometimes these things can be quite well disguised. So yeah, we're just going to cover some of the things to look out for some of the different marine pests that we have in New Zealand. So yeah, just a bit of an outline, kind of go through some introductions and housekeeping, which has already been done. Thank you. And what is marine biosecurity? Because again, a lot of people have a bit of an idea of what biosecurity is from going through the airports or seeing border control on TV, but marine biosecurity is a little bit different and has some pretty unique challenges. So yeah, talking a bit about this all eyes on the water concept, citizen science, how you can get involved. And then we'll go through the 9 marine pests of concern, and we talk about these pests of concern because these are the ones often listed in the regional pest management plans throughout regional councils. And then we'll go on to reporting a marine pest as well, talk about some other resources you can do to help you with your ID, and then do a bit of a Q&A as well. So yeah, biosecurity is the process of detecting and managing any unwanted species or diseases that could hurt either our economy, the environment, human health, and also just kind of our, the general way of life, well-being of New Zealanders. So like I said, a lot of people are familiar with this on-land biosecurity, dealing with rats, stoats, possums, things like Argentine ant, the brown marmot stink bug, and invasive weeds. Moth plant is quite a big one. But then those are quite obvious, and I guess the terrestrial biosecurity has been going on for quite a while. So in terms of technology and understanding, they estimate marine biosecurity is about 50 to 70 years behind terrestrial biosecurity. And that's just because I guess it's been a lot of that out of sight, out of mind idea. We just kind of haven't seen those real obvious changes in front of our eyes because not everyone knows what to look for or can get in the water. But we do have things like crustaceans, so crabs, shrimps, and also echinoderms, sea stars that are often stronger. They can breed quite prolifically and move, and kind of a lot of them are quite, they're just a generalist, have a generalist diet, so they'll eat anything kind of in their way. We also have things such as, Mediterranean fanworms, bit of the poster child for marine biosecurity, and they can just take up a lot of room. And we'll talk a bit more about how they do that, and also how they feed, which can outcompete our native species. There's other things like seaweeds. So we have the Caulerpa, which has been quite in the news at the moment, out at Aotea, Great Barrier Island, and Ahu, Great Mercury Island. We also can get diseases such as bonamia in the oysters, and other pathogens as well. So there's quite a range, and they go from tiny microscopic things to these larger, more obvious things like crabs and seaweeds. So yeah, it's just different. And being in the marine environment, things can move around quite easily as well. So, we've made up this little schematic to show that example of how these things can be so successful when they come to a new environment, particularly one where they don't have any natural controls, whether that be predators or I guess an industry or anything like that. So this is a little example about the Northern Pacific sea star, Asterius almarensis. Luckily it's not in New Zealand yet, but it's causing a lot of havoc over in Australia. And if you go onto YouTube, there is a fantastic video about in Port Phillip, and it just shows you kind of how they've taken over, just like shown in this schematic here. And these sea stars can have release up to 40 million larvae at a time. So quite a lot, even if a very small percentage of those survive. So just can kind of, not to try and scaremonger people, but it is just showing the impacts of what could happen if these things arrive, and just how we need to be mindful and making sure we have some good marine biosecurity practices in place so we can prevent things like the sea stuff and coming into our waters. So yeah, why are we doing it? So we're working to protect our coastlines, because when these marine pests can reach these high densities in our natural ecosystems, they can create changes and imbalances. So some of the things that they can really impact, that I guess we can measure, and that could be with an economic value often, things like the aquaculture industry. They can take over farms, some of these marine pests can create a lot of biofouling on the aquaculture farms, such as mussel farms, and, outcompete space for the mussels. So then there's more weight, it could damage the structures, or they might not get as much profit because they're not collecting as many mussels off their lines because there's just not as much space. Fisheries as well, if there's an added, our fisheries are already under a lot of pressure, and then adding in invasive species into the equation can, put, or even pathogens into the equation can put more pressure on these systems and, have a collapse. And that's both for recreational and commercial fisheries. Tourism, obviously, we're very, very lucky in New Zealand to have beautiful places to go, kayaking, boating, snorkeling, diving, anything by the water, and having lots of Mediterranean fanworm or lots of these invasive seaweeds can actually change how things look, but also, change some of the structures as well and get rid of the things we might want to look at, such as, nice fish or sponges or other kind of, fauna in the area. So, and that can eventually affect businesses and things down the line. Marine industries as well, they could potentially degrade marine structures such as wharves and piers, or attach to them, make them a lot heavier and things like that. There's other things that we can't measure that we do need to consider and protect. So, Indigenous cultural values, the gathering of kaimoana is very important to Māori, and is very special. And there's, places that they've got been, people have been going for years and years, and that's, something you can't put a value on at all, and is very important to a way of life. Yeah, just general recreation, enjoyment, and, we like to look at beautiful things. We don't want to see this monoculture of green seaweed washing up on our beaches, which is, some of the thing, unfortunately, is what's happening over in Aotea and Ahu. So it's really important to protect these things. And yeah, so we've got to know what we're looking at so we can get onto it earlier and start that response earlier, because the earlier we can respond to these kind of marine pest incursions, generally the more successful that. Sorry.
I got you. You're back.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know where I just was still talking. And I was like, I've been kicked off. Sorry about that. Might be my internet.
Oops.
All right. I'll just keep going and share my screen again.
Yep.
You might have to unmute me. Sorry, everyone, for that.
No worries.
Cool. Yeah, apologies for that. So yeah, another thing, just, they can also foul vessels, and so that can reduce your speed and how well you move through the water. So, it could interrupt your journey while you're out and about on the boat as well. So we'll start to, so that kind of leads us to this idea of pathways. So we often talk about pathways in marine biosecurity, and it's basically a term that we use to show how marine pests travel. And most of the pathways we refer to in marine biosecurity are kind of unnatural or artificial pathways. So that could be through aquaculture on the bottom of boats. They can attach to plastics, anchors, equipment, that kind of thing. But we do also have to acknowledge that there are natural pathways such as tides and currents. But it's the kind of the artificial or non-natural pathways are the ways that these marine pests move a lot quicker. And that's because often boats, equipment, all the things that I mentioned, they're the things that are moving more often, and also there's more of them. So it's the density and the frequency of these movements that often facilitate these pathways to move faster and further abroad, and that's kind of often how these marine pests are spread through different regions in New Zealand and also into New Zealand as well. So this is a screenshot of vessel movements around the world. I believe this one was taken pre-COVID, but you know, we're starting to, as things open up again, this kind of intensity of these vessel movements is increasing. And you know, a lot of the time we see New Zealand as this isolated country at the bottom of the world, but as you can see with all the red around our country and to other places, there is a lot of movement of vessels around New Zealand, but also to New Zealand as well. So in terms of marine biosecurity, it is something that is very high risk for us. So because of that, we do have different types of defences or different nets, I suppose, to try and prevent the introduction of marine pests. So we often split them up into pre-border defences and post-border defences. So those pre-border defences is often is managed by central government, so by the Ministry for Primary Industries and Biosecurity New Zealand, and they work with other national and international shipping companies and ports to make sure that before they come to New Zealand, they meet our standards. So there's two kind of parts to this. There's the IMO, which is the International Maritime Organization, I believe. They have standards for the exchange of ballast water. Ballast water is what a lot of these big ships hold on to while they're moving so they don't fall over. So they take it in at one port, and they used to just arrive to the next port and then dump it out in that port. And that's a problem because sometimes little larvae can be carried from place to place, come to the new port, and then be distributed there and settle on the structures at the port. So now there's legislation about that they must do a deep water mid-journey ballast water exchange, and that's got to be in a certain amount of water before they come into the 12 nautical mile region of New Zealand. There is also the Craft Risk Management Standard, which requires all vessels arriving to New Zealand to be free of marine pests of arrival, and that's for both commercial ships and also privately owned cruising yachts, so recreational vessels, and they've got to provide evidence that they are clean and have limited amount of biofouling and don't have marine pests, and that gets submitted to people at Biosecurity New Zealand. They have a dedicated team for looking at that document, and depending on what they provide and the risk profile of the vessel, they will sometimes go and inspect the vessel as well. And that's just on the marine side. They obviously do some inspections of the containered goods coming into the different ports as well. So, but occasionally a marine pest will slip through that pre-border and kind of at the border defence, and therefore it becomes a post-border issue, and that's where it kind of falls to the regional councils and regional legislation. So that's where our responsibility. So those are those domestic interventions, and that's where we do a lot of our surveillance. So we different regional councils in the top of the North Island will do surveillance, looking under the bottoms of boats. They'll do investigations, working with science agencies, excuse me, to do modelling. There is we do trapping for some species, monitoring and surveying, and we're really focusing again on those marine pathways management to control and minimise the risk of introduction of new species to different places within a region and also between different regions as well. Regional councils work with people like NIWA, Cawthron Institute, and also each other, as well as MPI, Biosecurity New Zealand, and the Department of Conservation to try and best, I guess, create and supply tools so they can do the best job to prevent, to have the best job of doing intervention, and respond as quickly as we can. But, we can't be everywhere all the time. And so a big component of this to make sure we can get to things quickly is making sure people, the general public, people who are in or on the water know what to look for. So again, that all eyes on the water kind of thing. So we're just going to go through those 9 pest species that, as regional councils, we've identified that they are an issue. And, when I say regional councils, also MPI, the Ministry of Primary Industries, has also identified that these are a problem as well. And so some of them are under certain parts of legislation in the Biosecurity Act. So, multiple layers of legislation on referring to some of these species. And one of these is the Mediterranean fanworm. It's listed as an unwanted organism under the Biosecurity Act. So Mediterranean fanworm, it first arrived in Littleton in 2008 on a boat from Australia, I believe. Then was found the following year in the Waitemata Harbour in Auckland, and then the following year in Whangarei Harbour. And it's just kind of, spread through different parts of all of New Zealand, but it's not everywhere. The way to kind of identify it, I suppose, is it's got, as you can see on that bottom left-hand picture, it's got this big fan and it kind of spirals up from the tube in a single crown, whereas our native species have kind of 2 fans and they kind of go out like in a figure 8 almost. The tubes are really tough. They build up the tubes around the worm using elements from within the water, so they can actually have quite a high concentrate of arsenic around them, but also using things like their own fecal matter as well. But they're really tough, leathery, sometimes look like sticks when the fan's tucked away, and they attach themselves using, it's like almost like this really strong glue at the base of the tube, and they can attach themselves to any kind of hard substrate. So whether that's a vessel, a structure, shell hash, seafood, even each other. The tubes can grow from 10 centimeters to much bigger. I think the record that we've had since I've been at council is about 60 centimeters. So they can grow really, really big. And each of the females, a female individual can release up to 40,000 larvae. So not as much as the sea star, but still quite a lot. And we're still trying to learn about when the fanworms spawn, because in Northland in particular, they seem to act a little bit differently to what's described in the literature. And it is possible that they have multiple times where the female will release those fertilized eggs. And that fan, as you can kind of see in the pictures, is often orange to yellow, but it will have kind of bands around it of purple, white, yellow, and brown. So that's good old fanworm. Next up, we have Styella clava, the club tunicate. So this one has been in New Zealand for quite a while. I think actually since the early 2000s even. And it's been a really big problem for the aquaculture industry, attaching onto, again, those mussel ropes. But I have heard from some colleagues up in Northland that it was also a really big problem at one of the marinas a few years ago, and they'd just get fish bins basically of this marine pest, but it seems to kind of have not as prominent anymore, but that's probably because the Mediterranean fanworm has taken over, so it's even ousted a marine pest. Styella clava, club tunicate. So it's got a long shaped kind of clubbed body with the 2 siphons at the top. That's how it pushes the water through one siphon, then out the other. It attaches to substrates using a short but very tough stalk. It's quite woody, and again, it just really glues itself onto those hard surfaces. It's quite well camouflaged. It's very warty, kind of and brown, uneven surface, and it's very, quite leathery to touch, quite thick. And yeah, it can vary in color, but it's often that kind of brown, kind of orange, maybe a little bit of red in there. And so I forgot to mention, so the Mediterranean fanworm is a suspension feeder, so it attaches itself attaches itself to a substrate, and then it kind of lets the water particles flow go past, and it takes out little bits of food as the water goes past. Mediterranean fanworm can be in densities of about 1,000 per meter squared, and like I said before, this tunicate here can be in really high densities as well, and attached to a variety of different substrates. So whether that be boats, again, here in the pictures you can see it's attached to marina pontoons, but yeah, will also attach to other marine pests or shellfish. Australian droplet tunicate, Eudostoma elongatum. So again, been around since the early 2000s. They're often quite creamy, kind of white color, but if you get up quite close, you can see it's got tiny little orange dots and flecks in there, flecks on it. So the club tunicate is a solitary ascidian, whereas this one here is a colonial ascidian. So all the kind of little orange dots represent the different individuals that form this mass colony. So they can grow quite long, so from about 5 centimeters to half a meter. Some literature suggests they might even be longer, so up to a meter or so. They have a very small stalk, which allows them to attach itself to hard surfaces, as seen in those pictures there. But they also can be washed up in the beach. When you touch them, some people have said they're almost like an uncooked sausage. Wouldn't recommend eating them though, but they are quite firm and gelatinous to touch. What's the real challenge about them is they grow to these big, long, sausage-looking like things over the summer when it's warmer, but over the winter they shrink to these little buds, these little colonies about the size of your fingernail. So it's just really hard to track whether they're present or not, because they've got this real big boom and bust cycle. And again, removing them can be quite difficult as well. And they have tried different forms of using different kind of chemicals or even heat to try get rid of them, but no success yet, which is a bit of a shame. So yeah, we often in the Bay of Islands in particular, they often get quite a big washing up, like shown in that big photo on the left there. Asian paddle crab, or Charybdis japonica. So it's a relatively large swimming crab. So across the back of the shell, it's about 12 centimeters across. It's got 6 spines on the shell. If you go out from the eyes, there will be 6 spines on each side there, but then 5 spines on the claws. Not that you might not have the chance to actually count all the spines though, because they can move pretty quickly, both in the water and on land. So they're kind of a pale green to an olive green color, but they also can be quite purple. Very, very aggressive. I don't quite understand the physiology, but their claws can reach a little further back than our native paddle crabs. So picking them up can be quite a challenge. They're very aggressive, and that aggressive nature is how they, can be quite successful. They're very efficient at eating lots of kaimoana shellfish. They will even eat each other, and they particularly enjoy the native paddle crab that we have, one of the native paddle crabs we have in New Zealand, Overlippes, which is a lot more of a pinky kind of sandy color, more found in the sand, surf beaches. Charybdis is more in that estuarine, muddy environment. But when the Overlippes native paddle crab comes up into the estuaries to breed, they also get rid of their shell I'm got kicked off again. Apologies. All right. Talk before I get kicked off once more. Jeff. I'm really sorry, everyone. I have no idea what's going on. Okay. I don't have that many slides to go, I don't think. Japanese mantis shrimp. So this can grow up to about 19, 20 centimeters long, so much larger than our native mantis shrimp that we have. It's also got a red to maroon line running down the center of its body, and it's quite a lot skinnier than the female mantis, the female mantis shrimp that you'll often find that's native to New Zealand. Another key feature is the outer, and you can see it in that big photo with the hand underneath. The outer tail edges of the tail are yellow and blue, so really bright and colourful, and again distinctive to tell it apart. Whereas our native species has grey and yellow edges, and again much smaller and way less aggressive. These mantis shrimp are very aggressive. They will eat their prey by doing a very high-powered, almost karate chopping motion. Again, if you go on YouTube and look it up, you can see that there's almost like a flash of light. The speed that they move their arm is about, can go about the speed of a bullet of a 22. So pretty powerful, and it just splits open shellfish. So if you ever see these around and try to handle it, just be really careful, because this species, along with the Charybdis paddle crab, can give you quite a nasty cut if you aren't careful. They're more in kind of those estuarine areas, like to burrow, and then they'll kind of pop out at the top of their burrow, ready to kind of strike their prey. They've often been caught in flounder nets by flounder fishermen, and some kind of, I guess, traps as well. So just very aggressive, will eat anything, and much bigger than the native species of mantis shrimp that we have. Asian kelp, or Undaria pinnatifida. This one's been around since about the 1980s, first introduced in Wellington Harbour, and unfortunately very well spread throughout New Zealand. There's only a couple of places that don't have it, unfortunately. It's quite a golden to dark brown, but it's really slimy to touch. It is an unwanted organism under the listed under the Biosecurity Act, but if you do see it, you will feel it's kind of got like a thick mucus layer. As you can see in some of these, the photo on the left and then the top right photo, it's got a really distinctive midrib, but that's only if the plant is bigger than about 5 centimeters. And the adults often look quite eroded at the top of the blade, look a bit stringy, a bit damaged. I guess the key feature, which you can see in the bottom right photo, is that frilled section at the base of the algae, and that's called the sporophyll, and that is the reproductive structure at the base. And this seaweed can hold, those sporophylls can actually survive through some pretty intense environmental conditions, and actually even if you remove it from the water, it still can be viable for a few hours. I think it's even can be days, but they're very good at just kind of protecting that reproductive structure. And if it gets fragmented as well, it can have that potential to still be reproductively viable. But what is challenging is the juveniles do appear like a single leaf, and that can look very similar to some of our native species, particularly the Aconia seaweed or paddleweed. So making sure that you can look at those differences is really important, particularly for something like this. seaweed. Back to kind of a sea squirt one, we've got Clavelina. We've got 2 species actually here. The one on the left is Clavelina oblonga, which is only in a couple of areas, I believe, Aotea, Great Barrier, and yeah, I think definitely there maybe Nelson as well, but I might be incorrect, sorry. But and then on the right we do have Clavelina lepidiformis, which is the light bulb obsidian. So they're both very, very small, 5 centimeters max, very delicate and gelatinous to touch, and they form, as you can see in the photos, these kind of colonies. You'll find them in a big bunch in different areas. So they're quite translucent, but they often have kind of little colors of white, yellow, or even pink, kind of making them look like, for the light bulb obsidian, like a light bulb filament. But even in the oblonga one, you can kind of see it's almost a little bit striped and has that pink tinge. It's got, again, the 2 siphons, which it uses for sucking in water and spitting it out. And in Northland, it's pretty new. We only have lepidiformis, the light bulb obsidian, in one place in Northland. So Clavelina, excuse me, is much more patchy around New Zealand, but you've really got to know what you're looking for to be able to see it, because it is so kind of camouflaged, very delicate, and so yeah, worth keeping an eye out for, particularly if you're out diving and things. And if you do want to find out more about where these species are, we do, there is the Marine Biosecurity porthole, which is managed by Biosecurity New Zealand and NIWA, but we also have a map on the Marine Pests .nz website, which shows you what marine pests are in different harbours as well, so you can kind of know what is in your area. Pyura, this is a complex, well, it's kind of a complex of species. It's got a very sac-like body, and it incorporates sand and shell hash, as you can see in the picture, into its kind of building up its protection. It's got brown to kind of red, leathery skin, and it's often flat. And as you can see, it's got the 2 siphons on top in a kind of a crisscross pattern. You find them in clumps often, but this is limited to the far north of New Zealand. So yeah, probably wouldn't come across it. It's very limited to that area, but worth noting when you're moving around. And then we also have Caulerpa. So there's been 2 seaweed Caulerpa species found in New Zealand that are non-Indigenous. We do have some native ones. It's almost like kikuyu grass, and we'll just kind of create these long runners or roots, which we call stolons, and they can go for quite a while. And then it's got these little fronds and little blades that pop up, almost like blades of grass. It will cover a range of different substrates, so whether it's sandy or rocky, and it just, spreads rapidly, forming these dense beds or meadows for many hectares. And this can smother and displace native species, reducing biodiversity, which is actually a very good way of protecting the introduction of new species, because if there's already lots of stuff there, not much real estate for other things to come in and make it their home. So it's a really bright green as well, so that makes it kind of stand out too. And like I said, at the moment it's just limited to Aotea, Great Barrier Island, and Ahuahu, Great Mercury Island. And they've got some controlled area notices in place on those islands to prevent people from putting down anchors, fishing gear, and the like, because that's how it spreads. You break the seaweed up and can create little fragments that can attach to gear. And if you put it away in a damp, moist environment, such as an anchor lock, or in a hole somewhere, and where it's not dry, it can survive for up to 10 days, and that's the way it can spread. So hopefully, sorry, it's been a bit condensed. There's been a lot of information, then I keep cutting out as well. My connection must be a bit dodgy. So, but what's really important is if you see anything that's unusual or things that you haven't seen in your local area before, it's really, really important that you report it. And how you do that is by taking a photo, ideally, maybe a sample, but again, like I said, there can be some legislation about things because they are unwanted organisms under the Biosecurity Act, or with regional pest management plan legislation. So take a photo, be descriptive with what you saw, excuse me, and where you saw it. So sorry, taking those location details, so landmarks, coordinates, anything that will help people find where it is. The more information you can provide to council or MPI, the better. And what you do is you contact your local council, look online. There's often an online form saying that you found something and you can submit that. You can also go to the MPI website and search for report a pest, and there's a form on there too. Yeah, so that's it from me. I'd also just, there is also some really great identification resources online. There is the MPI Pest ID Guide, which has just been updated. Again, that can be found on their website, or just do a quick Google search. We also, the Clean Below Good to Go brand and the Top of the North partnership, which involves the regional councils from Northland down to Hawke's Bay, Gisborne, on that kind of east coastline, along with DOC and MPI, have also formulated their own Pest ID guide, and that can be found on the Marine Pests website, which is marinepest.nz. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've just got it saved on my kind of auto fill in on my Google Chrome browser, so I'm a bit lazy. But yeah, really good resources. And we also provide newsletters to keep people up to date with what's going on with marine biosecurity for all those different council regions, and also what's going on with industry, research and innovation too. So worth a sign up to those and a bit of a read to learn more about that. And I will stop sharing. And yeah, thank you everyone. And any questions?
Thank you, Alice. That was awesome. I actually only just learned that that Mediterranean fanworm can like bioaccumulate arsenic, and also the Caulerpa. You said that it could live out of the water for 10 days
in a moist environment. So
yeah,
like somewhere where there's
wow.
Yeah.
No, so those have a lot more like a higher risk, like ones that and is it true that Mediterranean fanworm, even if you like pull it off, as long as a bit of that basal plate stays on whatever substrate, do they regenerate?
I don't know if it's more to do with the plate, but if some of the worm, they can, even if some of the worm can, I think, regrow, but it's all very...
It's a difficult one. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if that's been proven or not. Yeah.
That's all good. Well, I put some links down in the chat, and I also thought I'd ask you another, like a quick question before. We did have one question from the audience that had to do with regards to it this being recorded, and then I've got another one actually. So to answer that question for everyone, this has been recorded, and we'll let you know how to access it soon. We've got your email addresses from registering, so we can send that out once we post it. And we've got a question from Rhiannon, and she'd like to know what kind of pest management can the public do for these pests? She's thinking about an alternative to trapping for terrestrial. So I guess yeah, what can we do?
Yeah, great question. I think there's different ways to kind of, I guess, answer. I guess the big one is just keeping an eye out and reporting it is a big way that the public can get involved. And with some of these ones, like the Charybdis, Asian paddle crab, the Japanese mantis shrimp, and even Undaria, I mean, it totally depends on the environment where you've collected it from. You just have to be mindful, but you can actually eat those three species. But obviously, you've got to remember that some of those pest species do have added legislation. So you actually can't collect Undaria unless you've got a permit. Same with Mediterranean fanworm and club tunicate. So yeah, I suppose by eating the Charybdis and mantis shrimp, you're doing a little bit of pest control and getting a feed out of it as well, but just be mindful of where it is, because you don't want to make yourself sick by getting it from a polluted environment. But so yeah, reporting, and if you have equipment, a boat, anything like that, just making sure it is clean before you move it around. So even if that means you have to just check out your boat before you move it, or before you take out your fishing gear, just give it a little look over, maybe give it a rinse with fresh water and give it some time to dry. So just making sure you're encouraging those really good biosecurity practices, which actually apply to both land and the moana. So those would be my kind of recommendations.
Thanks, Alice. Would you encourage people to use iNaturalist to record those things, or is there a part of the Marine Pest website that lets you submit a report?
iNaturalist is really great if you're not sure what you're looking at, but sometimes that information doesn't get fed to MPI or to regional councils. So it's a really great tool and a really great to engage with the community, but sometimes it's just making sure that information gets to the right people. So I can only speak for my team, but we actually love it when people email us with being like, hey, I found this, what is it? Because it allows us to kind of do a little bit of research ourselves, and it's a great way just to engage with people. I just really enjoy talking to other people about this kind of stuff. So yeah, if it's unusual or you've just noticed that it's different, I would also recommend getting in touch with MPI or your local council as well. But yeah, iNaturalist is a great tool too.
Cool. Good suggestion. So we've got, before I ask the question from Peter, I wanted to know what you thought was one of the marine pests which poses the greatest threat to the New Zealand marine ecosystem.
Oh, that's a really good question. I guess it's tricky, like it's very circumstantial, because these different pests obviously have different impact. Like there's some very general impacts, but how they impact different environments or different industries will be very different. So I guess it kind of it depends on what the I guess people's priorities are, I suppose. But the biggest thing is that these species will often displace our native species, and instead of having this lots of different species in an area, it just kind of becomes more and more towards a monoculture or that reduced diversity. And that means that things like our ecosystem services can't be delivered, and those so that can change the resilience of those ecosystems, and they're less healthy. So just it's that shift which can be a problem, and I think all of these marine pests do it in a different way. So doesn't really answer your question.
No, but I couldn't expect a full answer when I know that we don't actually know the full impact of a lot of these marine pests, and
yeah,
it's got to be studied.
That too, yeah. There's a lot of, we know quite a bit, but there's so much more room to grow, and just getting that long-term information as to what these impacts are for these things that have arrived, could be very informative. And there's still all these things that haven't arrived, so we don't even know, but we're seeing what's going on overseas. But then how they interact in New Zealand might be slightly different. So there's a lot of unknowns, and places to kind of invest more into research, innovation, and development, which is very exciting, but can be a little frustrating when you don't quite have the tools, but you also don't know what tools you need just yet.
Totally. Speaking of tools, we've got a question from Peter Selwyn. He says, my understanding is that it's largely been decided that it's going to be impossible to remove Mediterranean fanworm from West Haven. I see it routinely, but don't do anything about it. And so could you comment on this? Do you know if there's anything that we can?
Yeah, it is a struggle when we have these kind of marine pests, and they've just established themselves so well, and we can't, it's going to be very difficult to try and eradicate them with the current technologies and tools that we have. Will we develop something that then could get rid of them? I don't know. And I guess there's that thing like can we just sit around and wait? You know, it's kind of tricky because then you've also got to weigh up, if we do try and do a mass removal of something that's so well established, how does that impact other things in the ecosystem, or in the even in the system, whether that's a marina or a marine reserve or anything. But one of the ways, Mediterranean fanworm can't survive in sustained freshwater. About 90 minutes of that will totally get rid of it. But if we locked off the marina and then put all this fresh water in, how does that impact everything else that's in there? So it can be a bit of a catch-22. And it just also shows that if you get onto a response early, you've got a better chance of managing it. And maybe that wasn't the case in West Haven Marina. I don't know the full history myself, so I don't want to kind of provide too much comment on it. But, from other experiences, from what I've heard in Northland, and from what I've seen in Northland, when we've got on things earlier, it seems to be more successful of getting rid of it. So, yeah, I guess there's some lessons to be learned from these ones, and hopefully we can apply it to the next thing that might be coming to New Zealand.
Nice. Thanks. I'm going to ask you, I think we might wrap up soon because it looks like that we've answered all the questions from the audience, but to close us up, could you tell us about one of the coolest things that you've seen when you're underwater doing hull checks and inspections on underwater structures?
Ooh. Well, I guess most of it's in marinas, so sometimes it's not that exciting. But I was in Marsden Cove Marina and I heard lots of banging, and I thought it was someone trying to get me up out of the water, because there was something, they sometimes get orcas in there, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's an orca right behind me or something. But no, it was just like a big school of very nicely sized kingfish, definitely legal sized. And they were hunting, and so they were chasing all the fish in the boat, and they were going so hard that they were actually whacking into some of the boats moored at the marina. So that was pretty cool. And I was very grateful that it was just some kingfish and not an orca.
That sounds pretty cool. Yeah, it was like banging sound. I don't wonder how they can make that sound. Is it much louder in the marina when you're scuba diving and there's heaps of there must be heaps of noise underwater? Well, that's not what this webinar is about, but
yeah, it's not too bad. I guess there's not too much, because hopefully no boats are moving around. Yeah, so it's pretty, I don't know, you get in the zone. So but yeah, so I'm always listening out in case a boat is running its motor, because I quite like having yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge around the marine pests, and also sharing your insight into some of the work that you do. Well, I thought that this was should be a great resource for people to learn a little bit more about marine pests. So we'll check this up on the Seaweek YouTube channel, and then share the link with everyone that's attended and wants to share it, or those that weren't able to make it. And on a note, with the whole webinar side of things, you can expect to see more webinars later this year from Seaweek. We'll be continuing with the Nakororo webinar series in a couple months' time, and some in-person events that are happening in Auckland as well that will happen year-round. So make sure that you sign up to the Seaweek newsletter if you want to stay informed about further details around those. And if you want to check out if there's more events that are happening in your area, check out the Seaweek website. And with that, we're going to say bye and see you later. And happy Seaweek, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the week.
Thank you, and sorry about all the connection issues.
Oh, good. Cheers, Aless.
Thanks. See ya.
See ya. Bye, everybody.